Compared to Nashville, it's so, I know it's hot, and it's hot for Phoenix and Scottsdale people, but boy, no humidity is just a blessing. It's like a swamp in Nashville, so this is great. But still, I know it's hot. Thank you for coming out, you guys.
I grew up in Chicago without air conditioning, so I'm sorry.
That's tough too. That's tough too.
July in Chicago was like horrible. Well, this is really a wonderful book. It's the 19th book in the Scott Harbass series. So I haven't mentioned this to Brad yet, but I am the perfect person to talk to about this because I have actually been to Murmansk.
Oh my goodness, have you?
I have.
Wow.
Now, how many of you know where Murmansk is or even know about Murmansk? Very few. All right, so if you are sailing up north around the coast of Norway and over the top of Sweden and Finland to Russia, the city that you get to is Murmansk. So it's at the very top of Russia. In World War II, it was a port, a major, such as it could be with the ice, port. And if you go there, it's very moving because they have an American cemetery and a French cemetery. There are an awful lot of Allied soldiers who lost their lives and who are forever in Murmansk.
Mm-hmm.
But global warming is turning it into like a warm water port.
And it's driving the polar bears inland, which is really interesting too. So they have a lot of trouble with polar bears and wolves. And the wolves, the small packs have been getting together into super packs, which is very interesting. And they've been preying on human beings in the villages. In that part, the Murmansk Oblast, the whole area down towards St. Petersburg. So it's been interesting. Everybody wants to walk outside by the shotgun. It's like, you never know what's going to happen, particularly in the wintertime.
So did you do on-the-spot research?
No. I got warned. I talked to friends of mine that work for the State Department, and I asked them, last book, Spy Master, actually has part of Russia that's an exclave, this part that Russia took in World War II along the Baltic, and it's not connected to Russia, it's on its own, and it's called Kaliningrad. And I talked to friends of mine at the State Department about going over there, trying to get a visa, and they said, you know what? You're on the television all the time saying Russia's our biggest global adversary, you don't like the Russians. They said it's not worth it to them to cause trouble for you here, but you'd be handing yourself to them on a silver platter. It would be drugs in a suitcase, or they would like nothing more than to discredit you back home. So I got warned against it, and it turns out that I know somebody who has done certain things in and out of Russia and has been to several of the places that I write about. So that's always my second choice. If I can't go there myself, I want somebody who has not gone as a tourist, but has gone and their life is dependent on paying attention to every detail. Because they hear things that you or I wouldn't hear. They smell things, they see things. If your life depends on it, your senses are very heightened. And so those people are ones that I turn to for color details. If I'm not going to Libya or Sudan or something like that, or now Russia, which is even get this. We're going to go, a friend of mine got made the ambassador to Germany, and he invited my family over to visit him at the ambassador's residence in Berlin, and we're going to go. And I wanted to take my kids, we're so close to France, take them to Paris in the best way. There's an overnight train. The Germans used to have one. They don't do it anymore, but there's a Russian one. And it stops in Berlin and it goes to Paris. So I called the same friends at the State Department. They go, Thor, are you an idiot? Can you not get it's the same thing? You think they couldn't put drugs in your bag? Because everybody that buys a ticket, it goes into a database in Russia and they check it and all this kind of stuff. And they said, the train would stop. You wouldn't know why. And it'd either be German officials that would get on or French. They just rat you out and say, hey, this guy, check his bag. He's going to say, not my drugs, but he's a big drug person. They'll do it. And so we're gonna do a daytime thing, I think.
Got to be like an Alfred Hitchcock movie, wouldn't it? There would be Brad.
Yeah.
From the train. How scary.
Like the guy with the knife in his back at the UN, North by Northwest.
So you might wonder why I even brought up Murmansk, but there's a reason. And the reason is?
The book starts off there.
Yes.
It's hard. Let me ask this. How many people have already read BACKLASH in the room? See how many hands. Okay, there's a smattering of hands, which means the majority of people haven't. I almost got put in front of a firing squad in Dallas because I let out a spoiler. And people started getting out of their chairs. They were really upset. I have to be careful with how I describe this book. How many people read last year's book, Spy Master? Okay, so I left you with a cliffhanger. So the last thing I want to do is to give away anything. Interesting, with Spy Master and the way I ended it last year, I knew at some point my paperback publisher was going to ask for 3 chapters of BACKLASH to put into the paperback of Spy Master. So when I was writing, I had to be very careful that the first 3 chapters did not pay off the cliffhanger, because I didn't want paperback readers to get to the cliffhanger and then have it paid off with a turn this page for the 3 chapters of Brad Thor's book for 2019 sort of a thing. So there was it was interesting writing this one. And my editor, when I finished Spy Master, I turned it in and my editor said, okay, great, I don't like the ending. You need a little something extra. I had just ended it before the cliffhanger, and so I went back to my office and I uncorked the bottle where I keep all the good idea fairies, poured it out over ice and sat there for a while and thought about it, and the muse finally showed up, second glass of bourbon, as she tends to do, and said, this is how I want you to end it. And I heard from everybody, and there's probably people in this room that hopped on Facebook or Twitter to tell me, why did you do that? Now we've got to wait another year. And my editor loved it, but the head of Simon & Schuster didn't. It was very, very interesting.
She's really scary.
Carolyn Reedy is a
really
lovely...
scary.
Well, you don't want to cross Carolyn. She's fantastic, and she's quite lovely. But she said, I just don't like cliffhangers. And I said, well, this will take care of itself in a year. I promise I'll pay it off in Backlash. And it was just the way it came to me, particularly because I used to like... books that had cliffhangers, and my favorite story about cliffhangers is The Count of Monte Cristo. So Alexandre Dumas had written that book to be serialized in a French newspaper, so that you would buy the next edition of the newspaper. So he did cliffhangers, and I enjoy it. But I heard from so many fans that did not enjoy it. They loved it. They loved the ending, but they thought, oh, I can't wait a year. So I think it'll be a while, if ever, because Carolyn Reedy will hunt me down if I do it again, I think.
Well, she might. And without any cliffhangers, if you're going to write a really long-term series about a guy who is faced with a perpetual series of crises, every once in a while you have to shake up his whole life, or it just becomes a rut.
Absolutely. So I'm a big fan. I'm a huge reader. I read more than anybody I know. I constantly have a book in my hands. I do binge a little bit of Netflix and Showtime and stuff, and there's a series that I particularly like on Showtime called Ray Donovan. And it's fascinating, and I love the character because nothing ever goes his way. He's smart, he's tough, but every time he thinks he's got it figured out, something else happens. And when I was putting together Backlash, I came across an interesting review from about 10 years ago in the New York Times of a translation back in 2008 of Homer's The Odyssey. And the gentleman who did the translation pulled out any repetition and used common everyday language. And I thought, I haven't read The Odyssey in a while, it'll be fun to go back to it. But what was fascinating about this review is the reviewer said that people going off to war should read the Iliad because it teaches you what parts of your civilized self need to stay behind in civilization. But people returning from war should read the Odyssey because it teaches the warrior what parts of him or herself need to be left on the battlefield before you can reintegrate into society, civil society. So it explored how Odysseus making his way home and getting knocked off course every single time was actually a step towards helping him readjust back to civilization so that when he got there, he was ready to reintegrate. And I thought, okay, that's what I want in this book. I want a story of trying to get home, physically trying to get home, emotionally and psychologically trying to get home. And I like to weave in, I call what I do faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. And I wanted to put two things in this book because I thought they were fascinating, and I spent all year studying the detail stuff. So I picked two things I thought was cool. I was really interested in what's called SEER school that the military goes through. And SEER is an acronym that stands for Survive, Evade, Resist, Escape. So how to not get captured in enemy territory. And if you do, what do you do then? And one of the things, as I was talking to SEER instructors, they said, you may only get one chance to escape. And you have to have already decided beforehand that if a chance comes, you're going to take it. You're going to go. So I was able to weave the SEER school stuff in here and what happens when you get taken captive and what you might do and how you stay one step ahead of the people hunting you. The other thing I was interested in is I said if a very high-level covert American operative got taken by a group, by a foreign nation, what machinery roars to life in the United States? I found out about something I didn't know. So under the Obama administration, when James Foley, the journalist, was beheaded by ISIS, there was a lot of angst, stress, difficulty with communication, similar to some of the stuff they saw running up to 9/11 where information was not being shared. And the Obama administration said, we've been working so hard to make our intelligence agencies talk to each other better. We need to make sure that we are communicating even more effectively when an American gets taken captive overseas. So we set up something called the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell that's run by a person out of the State Department that has its war room at the FBI. And they have desks in there from the major agencies. The NSA is in there, the Treasury Department. They all use the same water cooler, and they all talk to each other, trying to figure out, okay, if Venezuela did something, if Venezuela has this American, or Russia has this American, what kind of pressure can we bring to bear on them? All the while, the Pentagon people are in there too, saying, can we send a SEAL team in and get the person out? Or is the better way to go, Treasury Department freezes assets of the people in this group? And what's really cool is when I was in college, my neighbor is now, it was a buddy of mine in college, is now the head. He is what's called the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and I dedicated this book to him. So he's the one that goes around the world to some of the worst places and tries to get Americans back. One of a perfect example is the Christian pastor that was imprisoned in Iran, or Turkey, I believe that one was. But so he works on these things, and he's just a great, great guy, very selfless man, great diplomat, great negotiator. And I've just loved him for years, particularly his service to the country. He was a JAG lawyer in the Navy, and so it was a real fun thing for me to do. They could only pull back the curtain so much for me because they don't want to show their hand to the people they negotiate with. But I got to learn some pretty cool things, and I threw them in the book, and they were okay with all of them. I didn't have to, there wasn't anything that they made me take out, which was kind of fun.
That is fun. So, do we want to mention why Mermansk, or is that giving it
Sure,
away?
yeah. So,
it's the first 3 chapters.
Yeah, if you, who in here has read the first 3 chapters that I put online? Okay, so there's not a lot, so I have to be careful. So there's a particular hostage that's taken, and I was looking at if I kidnapped somebody, if I was going to kidnap somebody in the United States, and Russia was behind the plot. If there was somebody that had been a thorn in Russia's side, and they decided, you know what, he's never going to see it coming if we kidnap him in the U.S., how do you get him home? And I was looking at how far private jets could fly, if you could sneak him across the border, get him into Canada, and then put him on a private jet and bring him back. And I was looking at how far you could go without refueling, and Murmansk became the place that would be the transit point, where you would fly in with the jet, and then switch to another aircraft, and then move them to a black site if that's where you were going to go and interrogate them. So that's how Murmansk happens. In the very first page, it begins with the transfer of planes has already happened. The plane is taken off from Murmansk and develops engine trouble. And that's paragraph 1, page 1.
Got it. So another part of what you have to write about, excuse me, is surviving a plane crash. Because, they give you that little thing when you get on the plane that most of us don't really watch, about what to do if the plane's going down. But in point of fact, there are things you can do if the plane's going down that might enable you to survive.
So it's interesting. So this is my annual performance review, and I'm glad all my bosses showed up for my performance review. I tell people I don't work for Simon & Schuster. I work for all of you, the readers, as lovely as my friends at Simon & Schuster are. So when you read a book and you like it and you talk about it and you tell your friends about it, that's my performance review. So I really wanted to do something different and exciting with this book, to shake it up, because the greatest compliment I get paid is, wow, I didn't think your book could get any better than the one last year, and yet you've raised that bar. So when I was studying stuff for this book, particularly with plane crashes and everything, I am also, throughout the year, between the visits that we have with each other, I'm reading books on writing, because I believe that I'm not even close to being as good a writer as I can be. So I work all year on my craft trying to get better. And I read an interesting book, a screenwriting book. I was picking up some tips and things. I'm not writing screenplays, but I thought this is another area where there's a lot of people that teach about writing. And there's a screenwriting book called Save the Cat. And it is fascinating because it talks about how to make your hero interesting and relatable right away from the first moment you see him. And they talked about a scene. There was a movie with Al Pacino and Ellen Barkin called Sea of Love, and it was a thriller. Al Pacino was a cop, and it fascinated me because I loved this movie, and this book talked about it. The opening scene is a sting that the NYPD does almost every year. For people that have not come back to see their parole officers, there's outstanding warrants for them and everything. They send them a note on New York Yankees stationery saying, congratulations, you've been picked for season tickets to the Yankees. And, by the way, the cops only catch the dumb criminals, just so you know. Right? It sounds far-fetched, but that's why the cops only catch sometimes they get the smart ones too, but they largely catch the dumb ones. So The movie opens with a ballroom at like the Grand Hyatt, New York, and a man is running in late with his son. And he's got his baseball cap on, and his son has his baseball cap on. The dad is a bail jumper, hasn't shown up for court, whatever, and Al Pacino's a cop, and he sees this man with his young son. And he doesn't want to bust him. He very quietly shows the man the badge, and the man understands this is a sting, and the man mouths, "Thank you" to Al Pacino, and Al Pacino goes, "You're welcome. I'll catch you later." And it was just such a cool scene, and you automatically like Al Pacino because he did that. So right away in the beginning of this book, I had to decide, how do I do that? And so what Barbara's talking about, how do you survive a plane crash? There's a lot of information that just assuming that crash position, just the little tilt of your body increases when you put your hands on the seat back in front of you, that actually can help raise the chances that you're going to survive. But there's a prisoner on this airplane, and somebody has to say, we have to unshackle this guy. He has to be able to, you can't let this guy die. You've gone to do so much to grab him. You have to do everything you can to protect him.
You're just wasting an asset.
Right, exactly.
The whole point of the mission.
And so I did this so that the person will survive, but then he also has that debt to the person who unshackled him. So I talked to a Navy SEAL instructor that does a lot of their cold weather survival and warfare training in Alaska. And I talked about, well, what would you do if you were on this Russian plane and it crashed? What would be the first thing you'd do? And he goes, well, what would you do? And I'd be like, I don't know, I'd be looking for a coat. He said, I'd be looking for a gun, and I'd be looking to kill every single person on that plane as quickly as I could to protect myself. And I said, okay. I said, what if you had trouble finding a coat? And this was really interesting, because I remember in Rambo, the movie, David Morrell's fantastic first book, Rambo finds a trailer and he makes a poncho out of a tarp that he finds in there. And this SEAL told me, after I made sure there was nobody else that could do me any harm, the first thing I'd do, if there weren't coats that were obvious, he said, before my fingers froze up, I'd be stripping insulation out of the interior of the aircraft and shoving it in my clothes. So that's one of those SEER things that I learned along the way that was really cool.
Well, it needed to be winter for, when I was in Murmansk, it was 99, and there's no air conditioning, and I thought, seriously, I mean, what is all this bit about the Russian winter? But it was July. But in your book, it is winter.
Yes.
It's really cold.
It is very, very cold.
So even if you survive the crash, the chances are that the weather will kill you, and the cold will kill you.
And that was the big thing for me, is the clock was racing, while back home, as that Hostage Recovery Fusion Center spun up, there was a lot, and I talked to the people in the Hostage Recovery Fusion Center, one of whom had been, before he got there, had been involved with intelligence against the Russians and the Soviets, and he said, if the Russians did grab somebody here, they would leave a lot of false clues, because the longer they can hold on to a prisoner, the more time they have to interrogate that prisoner. He said, so the more they gum up the works back in the United States, the better it is for them. So I love this idea that there's somebody the U.S. has to get back very quickly, but they don't know where he is. They don't even know who took him, because there have been clues left behind that suggest maybe this person wasn't taken. Maybe this person snapped, PTSD or something like that. And probably the most fascinating thing I learned in all of this was we hear finding the needle in the haystack, right? So when I talk to people at the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, at Delta, the SEAL teams, they said, no, the needle's not the problem. They said, you find us the haystack, we'll find the needle. It's just a matter of finding the haystack. And I thought that was cool. I'd never heard that before.
Wow. No, I neither. Did they give you any tips about how to find the haystack?
There were some. It's really, it's very, very difficult. I learned about Russia having a different GPS system than we do. So they have their own satellites, and the difficulty, I mean, it's interesting to watch right now with the 5G technology discussion that's happening in the United States, and the Chinese want to put theirs in with Huawei, and we're saying no. Anybody who knows anything about espionage is saying, we don't want any of the Chinese stuff. What's interesting about Russia is they have a lousy 5G system, but their lousy 5G system is better than our practically non-existent one. And what Russia's doing is they're using their propaganda TV channel, Russia Today, and they're putting out these stories about 5G causing cancer, birth defects, because they're trying to get Americans that don't pay enough attention or don't try to do their own research to believe it. So the book kind of reflects some of those attempts by Russia to make themselves better by making us less strong and less cohesive, because that's ongoing with the Russians.
It's really 1984 come to pass, isn't it?
It is.
In a scary way. My granddaughter told me in all seriousness that she had a friend that dropped out of high school, and And my granddaughter asked her why, and she said, I don't really need to study because I have this really smart woman in my phone.
Siri. Oh, that's funny.
So I reel back from that. But if in fact that's sort of how it's going, then this whole misinformation, disinformation thing becomes a lot more serious because there's no way to counteract it if people aren't taking charge of their own research.
So the Russians pushed an anti-vax thing in Washington in a particular county, and it was working. They were targeting people through Facebook ads in this county. They just, I don't know how they picked it, threw a dart at the wall and just said, or at the map, and said, we're going to see if this works. And it did. And the amount of parents that stopped vaccinating their children in this county, it was incredible. So that's stuff with people who don't pay enough attention, who believe every email that's sent to them or believe every post on Facebook. The Russians are trying to take advantage of that. So that's part of what plays in here too, not the anti-vax stuff, but how Russian intelligence works and how they target America in certain ways, particularly in this case because the asset that they want has all these secrets. And if they can get them long enough and break them, it's going to help put them ahead on the intelligence curve even further. And they've saved for the president of Russia the grand honor of, once they've extracted everything in interrogation, putting a bullet in this person's head. So that's a thing that plays out throughout the book too, is the Russian president waiting for this person to be wrung dry of all the intel, so that the Russian president can say, "You've been a pain in our ass for years, and now you've killed our operatives, you've taken our crooked diplomats hostage. That's it. We're gonna get our revenge on you."
So this is a nameless Russian president?
Fictitious. This is it may have some, it definitely has roots in real life, but this is the high wire act that I walk as a thriller writer, where I want the books to be as current as tomorrow's headlines. I want you to read my thrillers and think, this could come, it hit my doorstep tomorrow. But I also want new readers to pick up a book of mine from 10 years ago and still feel that way. That's why I never wrote about bin Laden, because I knew eventually they would capture or kill him. And why would you have a book where bin Laden figures prominently? Why would you? It would be hard to be excited for me about a book if I knew, oh yeah, we got him X amount of years ago. So you got to be careful what facts go in the fiction.
You absolutely do, even relating to quantities of money, because you can really date a book by like a ransom amount can be too low.
And songs. When you put in pop hits, and suddenly 10 years from now, you age the book very quickly.
So as an international thriller writer, you have a kind of constantly evolving target antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember how many books back, you have a really great book about the Chinese guy. That was
right, Active War.
I love that book. It was here in the United States. But now Russia, it's like the whole Cold War has been revived, and we're going back, we're kind of leaving ISIS and heading back towards Russia. Maybe it'll be Iran in another year or two, the way it's going. Do you feel like, to make your books credible, you do need to sort of follow the evolution of who the new targets are?
I think it helps, and I think it makes it interesting. So those of you that have read Spy Master, last summer's book, you know that the plot there is NATO has the Article 5 condition that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. Well, what if you had a United States, much like we do, that's war-weary from Iraq and Afghanistan, and many Americans that would have difficulty picking out one of the smaller NATO members in the Baltics, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, on a map, and what if the Russians went in and tried to grab one of those, like they did the Crimean Peninsula? Would Americans say, I don't want my sons and daughters going over to help get back Estonia. I don't even know where it is. I don't care. I don't care what the treaty says. It could be extremely unpopular. So I thought, well, what if you had a president that said, I don't want to go there either, so let's do everything we can to make sure the grabbing of Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia doesn't happen. And that was the plot and the premise. And that got a lot of heat last summer, a lot of attention because of the Helsinki summit between Trump and Putin, and some of the things that the Russians had done in that area. And there's a real concern in the Baltics that Russia may try, because Putin has said, I want to get all these territories back for Russia. And he tried to go into Georgia under George W. Bush, got repelled, but the borders changed, but he was successful in going into Crimea. And real quick, when I wrote Spy Master, I was fascinated. When the Soviet Union broke up, a third of their nukes were in Ukraine. So we said to the Ukrainians, if you agree to get rid of them, we will promise to protect you. No one will ever invade you. No one will ever take your territory. And they said, okay, that sounds good. Make the Russians sign it too. And the Russians did sign it, but yet they came in, they took the Crimean Peninsula, they went in and fomented revolution. They call them the Little Green Men. I write about the Wagner Group. This private military corporations like Blackwater are illegal in Russia. But there's one, and that's the one Putin sends to places like Syria, like Ukraine, and all this kind of stuff. So they become a big antagonist, this desire by the Russian president to not technically have his fingerprints on some stuff that's happening in this book. But that's a real group. And they subscribe to a real-life Nazi, there is a Nazi/pagan cult that developed in Russia at the end of the Cold War. It's fascinating. And this group called Wagner was started by a Russian Spetsnaz officer, it's their special forces, who chose the call sign Wagner for himself because that was one of Hitler's favorite composers. These guys idolized the SS. It sounds like something made up out of a novel, doesn't it? But they really exist. They really have this ideology. And those guys were irresistible. For an international thriller writer, I had to put them in. They were the perfect bad guys. You know, it's like the SS in the Indiana Jones movies. I mean, they're just corrupt and evil to the core. Nothing stops them from doing whatever they're told. They don't care about civilian casualties. I mean, they're really bad people. And if you watch what was happening in Venezuela when Maduro was starting to topple a couple of months ago, and you didn't know if the military was going to turn on him, that's who Putin sent into Venezuela to shore him up in case the military did turn. He had the Wagner, the private mercenaries from Putin were sent over, but Putin could say, I don't have anybody over there, because it's not the Russian military. So he gets the plausible deniability, which is what we write about a lot in international and political thrillers.
He really would like to restore the USSR
completely,
and even bigger in point of fact.
And he needs NATO dissolved. So I tell people, when you see the trouble we're having with Iran, where they're putting mines on boats in the Hormuz Straits and everything, this actually plays into Putin's hands because we are saying to our European partners, don't trade with Iran, don't work with them. And that's what Putin wants, is strife between us and France and Poland and Germany so that it weakens NATO, because Putin sees NATO and the US as the two greatest threats to him expanding back into this glorious pre-dissolution of the Soviet Union era.
It's interesting that he never seems to look east towards China.
No.
But you know,
he knows he'd get crushed by the Chinese.
Right. And, you know, you have to really feel for the Polish, whose country has been like just, you know, a walkover for back and forth between Russian, whatever. I mean, that part of Middle Europe has just been trampled.
Well, it's interesting. So Spymaster, I found out I have a lot of friends in the diplomatic corps in Poland. It's very, very interesting. They really like Spymaster. They like that there was a Polish character in there. And I think early 2020 is when the book comes out in Polish. And our current ambassador to Poland is reading Spymaster. So I'm hopefully going to go over to Poland and do a launch of Spymaster in Polish because I think it's someplace I've never been in all my travels, and I would love to go. And I think it's pretty cool for the Polish people to have an American thriller novel that shows a Polish intelligence operative as important to the successful conclusion of the plot, and also a thriller that lays out some of the real threats and scary things that Poland's facing.
Very true. I have one final question to ask you before we turn this over, and I don't think I've asked you this before, and this sounds really dumb, but it did occur to me. In trying to figure out how to name a long-term protagonist, how did you decide, and why did you decide to call him Scott Harvath, which is not...
That's a great... It's Scott with one T, no less.
Yes, I have misspelled it and been called to order by your publicist.
Yep.
So
this is interesting. So I was looking for a name that was unique, unusual for the last name, and so Harvath happens to be a friend of my wife's family who processes FISA warrants for the Department of Justice. It's been there for a long time. So the FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the ability to listen on phone calls and things overseas, here's the probable cause, here's where we want the warrant, all that kind of stuff. And she's been there for years, particularly on the front lines, things to do with Russia and terrorism and things like that. So that Harvath is a real person, lovely person. And then Scott, my own brother is named Scott with one T because my mom didn't want to see Scotthor. She thought it was too many T's. So I used one T as an homage to my brother. And fans started asking, readers were like, why is it only one T? Why is it only one T? My entertainment attorney is Scott with two T's. And he said, before I read the book, tell me, does he finally find the other T at the end of this book? And so I had to finally give Scott Harvath a middle name, and it was Thomas because his mother didn't want to see Scotthhomas. So that's how the name came about.
You just stole that from your mother.
Yeah, I stole it from my mom.
Well, why not? You know, if you have to live with this person and this name for now 19 books. You know, it's important that you like it. I've often wondered if authors have like name remorse. Somewhere along the line.
Yeah, you wish
I hadn't called him
That's
Bruce
funny.
or whatever.
No, it's nice for me, and I always tell people that I think James Bond was Ian Fleming's alter ego, Jack Ryan was for Clancy, Dirk Pitt was for Clive Cussler, and Harback definitely is for me. He gets to do all the things that are probably too dangerous for me to go out and do. So he's become my best friend. I mean, I live with him throughout the year to bring everybody a new book. And I have to tell you, I so appreciate, again, everybody who's come today, and the response for this book has been like nothing I have ever seen before for one of my thrillers. I really took kind of a big leap off the cliff, and I did things I've never done before. I wrestled every day with every single word placement, every sentence, every paragraph. It was really important to me, and several times my editor said, "Where's the manuscript?" And I said, "It's just not right yet." And she said, "Well, we don't want to change the publishing date." And I said, "I understand that's a problem, but it's more important to me that I'm giving the readers the absolute best I'm capable of." So I said, "Trust me. I know I'm shortening your ability to do what you need to do before the book comes out, but it'll be worth it. But the ultimate is, do you think it's worth it? And do you say, all right, wow, great ride. I can't wait for the next Brad Thor book. And if that's how you feel, then I've done my job and I get that 5-star performance review."
Well, questions from any of you after that? Yes.
Well, not only do you have us hanging on when the next book is, but what's going on with the movies?
So the question is, what's going on with the movies? So I am going to write a book, maybe we'll do the kickoff for it here, about all the twists and turns in Hollywood. All right? In a town of beautiful people, I have kissed every single frog in Los Angeles and over the hills in the valley. So it is amazing, and a lot of people have this story to tell. A lot of people who successfully get a movie made. So we're in a deal. We switched studios. We're at another major studio now because the previous studio where we had our deal, a new executive came in at the top. And it's like the Serengeti. A new lion comes into the pride and kills all the cubs. So we had the best screenplay ever. Yvonne, who works with me as my executive vice president, she said it's the best screenplay she's ever read, that they had written for the Athena project, and then we were doing a Harvath thing alongside it, and it got killed. And so that great screenplay is probably never going to see the light of day, which is fine because we moved studios, and this new group is even better. They just got back from Cannes, where they were selling in with foreign distributors, and we got an international co-production partner. It's the furthest in the process I've ever gotten. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but until I'm sitting in the theater with that tub of popcorn and my Coke, I'm not going to believe it's true. But we are really, really close. But I've been really, really close many times. And so I've said, I'm not going to go out and talk about how you guys have optioned the rights. I'm not going to help you do any press, because I've done that a million times just to have it blow back on me that stuff doesn't get made. When you get it made, then I will happily go on the road and tell everybody, by the way, so I'm sure these guys are going to do a great job, but I joke around with them too, because they put a clause in saying I can't disparage the movie or the TV shows. And I said, fine.
They learned from a master
who
lives here.
So my deal is if I say nothing, I don't do any publicity for it, that'll be a cue. But the people are so talented that they put in with this. I mean, big name. I like huge names. If I rolled through who the writer was and who the producers are, you'd be going, wow. Because every few weeks there's another update. We've got this person attached. We've got that person attached. But until it's done.
But you know what? It's just a Game of Thrones in Hollywood. And the truth is, no matter how great all the people are on the projects, it's the executive twirl at the top.
If you're going to spend $100 million, they have to have such a high degree of confidence that this is a winner.
It's not just that, but they change. They're new people, and as you say, it's like the lion coming in. There was a thing I read in the New York Times today, in fact, about something similar where somebody new came in and blew away all the
previous projects.
Yeah,
we're going to go do monster movies
right,
now. We don't want any more superheroes.
Yeah, I mean, they want to make their own mark and they want their own loyalty and all. So you can just get eaten alive in the process without it being a comment on your books at all.
Yeah.
Right. Another question?
Yes, sir.
Question is, when you're writing Nicholas the Troll.
Okay, when I'm writing Nicholas the Troll.
Yeah. See, when I read him, I'm thinking of Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones.
Oh, you're thinking of Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, Peter Dinklage.
Yeah,
yep.
just wondering if you have somebody in mind. Maybe it's Peter Dinklage.
Well, it's really interesting. So when I talk about the troll, the way I got the troll, and it's not super sexy, but the troll came from I was ready to hang myself with all the Dora the Explorer that was going on the TV in my house. I mean, it was so bad. My kids loved that thing. It was like on a loop. And there was only one, like, I thought, I can't keep telling my kids we gotta watch something else, and they're little, and they like Dora, and they're learning about things. And so I finally said, I gotta find an anchor in this show. I gotta find one character, and I wanted to just get my Suburban out and run over Boots the Monkey. I hated Boots the Monkey, but I liked the grumpy old troll who lived under a bridge. And I thought, this is really interesting because, you know, Dora or Boots could have kicked his rear end. I mean, this guy, no, I'm not answering your riddle, I'm going over that bridge. What are you gonna do about it? And we, in Chicago, we had in the neighborhood we lived in, there was a little person, always very sharply dressed, apparently an executive that would take the Chicago Transit Authority bus to work every day. And I'd see this person, and my children would ask, why is that adult so little? And in my mind, having like the grumpy old troll under the bridge, I thought, what would be the ultimate strength that somebody that size could have? Would it be heart and character, or would it be brain power? Would it be a combination? And that started getting me into the troll, grumpy old troll, not letting people cross the bridge unless they solved the puzzle. And that got me thinking, wouldn't it be fascinating to have a little person character that was actually pretty evil, that dealt in blackmail and the theft of top secret intelligence and that kind of stuff. So Peter Dinklage I've loved since before Game of Thrones. He did a movie called The Station Agent, which is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, watch it. He's a fabulous actor. But in the back of my mind is that grumpy old troll, and particularly that person that I so admired, that little person in my neighborhood that always dressed to the nines, going to their job, hitting it, while everybody stared at them, at this person. That happened every day. So that's kind of where the troll came from. That's what plays in my mind, and I love Peter Dinklage. I mean, I think he's fantastic. I think he'd be a perfect person for it. And I also want to believe that there are other little people who are actors in Hollywood that would like to get a role instead of it going to Peter Dinklage. And that's, as much as I love Peter Dinklage and it'll be up to the executives in Hollywood, I'm going to do my best to make sure that this gets widely cast, that some other actors who are of short stature get a chance to audition for their big break. I'm sure Peter's fantastic. He looks like an awesome guy. But I just want to make sure that we don't rush into anything but again, that becomes the studio's issue because he's highly bankable. And you throw him in a movie and that guarantees they're not going to lose their money. I'll probably get overruled on that, but it's what I'd like to see happen. I want to be as egalitarian as possible, make sure everybody gets a shot.
Very nice. Way in the back.
Yes, sir, all the way back there.
You've introduced other groups like the Athena Project. Are you looking at doing either another Athena book or on one of the other groups of soldiers that Harvath is working for?
So that's a great question. So I've introduced other groups that Harvath has worked with, like the Athena Project, and am I going to do anything else? Absolutely, absolutely. So this is my 19th thriller, 18 in the Scott Harvath series, and every time, particularly this time around, I've had so many people talk about the Athena Project, and are you going to bring another one out? And for years I've said I've had this idea. So my challenge now is to get away from the business of book writing so I have more time to do the book writing. And so that's what I'm trying to do with this year going forward. I'm going to turn 50 in August. So it's a big next 10 years for me that I really want to do. I want this book to mark a turning point because so many people have fallen in love with this book and said it's just gone so much more than any previous books. And I want to double down. I want to give the fans more. And I really want to challenge myself to just create over the next 10 years some of the stuff things like you've never seen before. I was so anxiety ridden and stressed about Backlash because it was such a leap and I was really worried, and it was ridiculous because the reception has been so good, and that's a sign from you to me that I need to trust those instincts and go for those stories and tell them maybe in a way that I don't feel safe doing, but is going to end up being something that's just incredibly compelling reading.
And you know what? It's a very crowded field. So if you are doing something that is not what everybody else is doing, you will stand out.
That's my goal. 5-star performance review next year. Already working on it.
I think you've got a pretty good performance view right here looking at the audience. Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask?
And I'm happy to answer questions when you come up too. Yes, sir.
Spy Master. Seems to me like you're kind of moving Harvath into a more of an office
This is a great
supervisory position, but he still is kind of fighting you.
So the gentleman's brought up that, and that's a great way to explain it. He said, Spy Master, it looked like I was trying to move Harvath into a more managerial office position, and he's fighting me. It's exactly what it is. I've got a couple of friends who are so awesome at what they do that their bosses at a couple of agencies that I'm not going to mention the names have said, you're too valuable to keep putting out in the field. You need to come here and work on the farm team to bring up the next generation of spies and covert operations people. And this is really tough. You get addicted to the action, the lifestyle. And there's nothing worse for some of these guys than being a former action guy. So for Harvath, there is this challenge, and I put it to him in this book as well, which is, what is your duty? Is it to yourself and to your needs and your desire to be out there kicking indoors and shooting bad guys in the head? Or is it to your country at an even higher level? That is a duty to your country when you're going chasing bad guys. And so Harvath has wanted it both ways. 1 foot in the field, 1 foot back. And I've talked to a couple of my buddies who read an early version of Backlash. And if you read Spy Master and you heard about the way Harvath cheats to keep his edge and some of the things he's doing, I've got guys that are really doing this. So I like Harvath being in the field. I like him being action-oriented. I don't want to put him behind a desk because I think it would drive him crazy. And I think he's got multiple adventures still left in him. So, but I think it's an interesting, what's my duty? Do I owe the country more than I owe myself? And am I serving the country to my fullest if I keep taking these assignments and I'm risking getting captured and stuff like that? It's a great question.
So that's a really interesting ethical dilemma, but we now know that actually there is a real addiction to risk. There's a
Yes,
real
there is.
adrenaline addiction.
You can't get it behind a desk, and you end up replacing it. I've known guys that have come back out of the field, and they are so addicted to the action that they replace that excitement of going into dangerous situations by doing dumb, foolish things back at home. They do it can disrupt marriages, it can be very, very bad, but to get that high, to get that adrenaline dump, you have to chase things that are either dangerous or morally questionable in some instances, stuff that polite society would not be out there doing because you can't get the high from it. So it's very dangerous. If you can't, there's no methadone for that lifestyle. You cannot get off the action. There's nothing that replaces it.
I've actually thought about that in relation to Vladimir Putin, because he was an active KGB field agent and so forth. Is that what he's doing in part?
Yeah, and he loves to take his shirt off.
I mean, seriously, because it really is a very well-known problem, and maybe guys like him, that this is the way they go on dealing with it. I'm going to save this question up and ask Daniel Silva this
That's a good
about
question.
Gabriel, because, he's got the same kind of thing going on about, is he in the office, is he in the field?
Sure.
And what do you do? So, anybody else have a question they would like? Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I've had my back to you all on. I apologize.
I heard you on Dennis Miller talk about your first job after USC being on a television show, travel television show. Could you tell us more about that, and what did you learn from that experience?
Oh, so this is great. This nice lady asked about my first job out of college, which was I had a travel show called Traveling Light on public television. That was me running away from being an author. I actually, in college, I saved up a bunch of money, and I decided I would do something no American in history has ever done. I would move to Paris and write a novel. Had never been done. People say there's some guy named Hemingway or something like that, and there's Scott Fitzgerald. Never heard of those guys. I was the first important guy to come up with this idea. And I got 3 chapters into writing this novel, and I was just terrified of, what if the novel's a failure? What if I don't finish it? What if it's no good? What if it doesn't get published? It's that voice that all of us, to some greater or lesser degree, have, which is, don't risk the embarrassment. Easier to just forget about it, keep your head down, and just don't do it. Don't go after it, because what if you fail? So I shipped my laptop back home, and I traveled in Europe, and I love to travel. And Rick Steves' Travels in Europe was already on public television in the United States, but I thought traveling at any age makes you a better person. It made me a better American, because I appreciated all of the blessings we have here by seeing my country from abroad and what other people have and don't have. And I came home and I wanted to do a travel show for public television geared 18 to 34-year-olds. So I pitched public television on the idea, and A lot of stuff happened during that process, but I did get it on, and I did 2 seasons. And I was wrapping my 2nd season, and I was on my honeymoon, and my wife asked me, on your deathbed, what would you regret never having done? And I said, writing a novel and getting it published. And that's how that came about, making that decision to switch from TV to writing novels.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
I was just curious if you had like a real physical location for Bishopsgate.
So do I have a real physical location for Bishopsgate? I have an actual church that exists. It's fiction. So the estate that Harvath lives on, just south of Mount Vernon, is something that I made up. It's based on a real church. It's based on the history of what happened during the Revolutionary War, where there was the whole thing with the Loyalists, and there were several churches that were sacked, kind of in that area and everything. But it is. I've stared at Google Maps tons of times, and the closest thing I could figure, there's like row houses there. It's a housing development, and I'm like, that's where it would be. So it exists up here in your own mind when you read the book.
Well, it's time to thank you all for coming by giving a book away. So I am going to ask Brad to say a few words about an author that he's kind of mentored, right?
Okay. Yep.
Named Jack Carr, who I mentioned to you will be here on the 29th of July. And I say that in part because Jack writes very eloquently about how kind and helpful and all that Brad has been. So this is my advanced reading copy, and one of you will get to go home with it, but maybe Brad could say a couple words about Jack.
So real quick, a good Navy SEAL buddy of mine said, hey Brad, I've got a friend in the SEAL teams. He's about to get out. He's a lovely, lovely guy, and he's written a book, and he'd like to get it published. Would you spend some time on the phone just kind of giving him pointers and all this stuff? And I said, if he's a friend of yours, he's a friend of mine. And Jack Carr and I ended up talking on the phone. He's just fabulous, fabulous guy. And I said, let me see if I can get you together with my editor, Emily Bessler at Simon & Schuster. I said, I can't promise anything. I can open a door, but you have to then stand alone with the strength of your work. And they got together, and Emily loved his manuscript and ended up signing him. And he's also been very kind to me. He's one of these guys in the SEAL community that I can ping stuff off of, and he's helped in the back of BACKLASH, back of Spymaster. You'll see my personal thanks to Jack Carr as well. So it's a very nice two-way street. I used to live in Park City. He's moved to Park City, Utah. Has a lovely, lovely family. And he's just a great, great writer, and even better, he's a great human being. I mean, I joke with him because he's done the 2 things career-wise that I wanted to do, but he did them in the proper order. I always wanted to be an author and a Navy SEAL. He was a Navy SEAL, now he's an author. I can't go be a Navy SEAL now. I'm too old to go do it, so he's smarter than me in that aspect, in that he did it in the right order. So he's a lovely guy, and if you get a chance to come listen to him speak, he's fantastic. So I highly, highly recommend him. But even better than listening to him speak is allowing his words to speak for him. He's a fabulous writer. So his first book was called True Believer. If you haven't read... the Terminal List in True... I've got the new book on the brain. So True Believer is a new one coming out. That's what Barbara has the ARC for.
I can add that Jack's mother was a librarian. Because I asked him, I said, seriously, you're a Navy SEAL and all you really want to do is retire and become an author? And he said, my mom was a librarian. I thought, okay. That explains it.
And that's a crowded field, by the way, too. There's a lot of ex-military guys that are getting in, but very, very few that stand out. And Jack is one of them.
Well, the reason Jack, like you, stands out so well is that it's not just all about the spy craft and the trade craft. It's really about the characters. James Reese is a great... The comment you made about making Al Pacino and making him likable.
Right, making him likable
right away. It's the same thing with James. So I'm sorry, Susan? 77. So I need you to pick a number, if you would, between 1 and 77, and that lucky person will go home with Jack. Or Jack will go home with you, rather.
68.
Is that you?
Wow. Whoa! Congratulations. Boy, that couldn't have been easier. Wow. It's a little too like Chicago. First guy sitting to the side. Congratulations.
So I'm going to give one more book away because there's so many of you, and I feel like we could. Tomorrow night, there's a lovely guy coming named Paul Doyron, who I think writes wonderful books about, and this is, I think, the only state, or at least one of the very few states, where a game warden can also be an investigator. So those of you who are CJ Box fans know about Joe Pickett, but Mike Bowditch, his guy, gets to investigate crimes. And one of the reasons I particularly like this book, and we've spoken about it just at the beginning of all this, is wolves, because there is a wolf in this book, that, and much of the book, the fate of the wolf is one of the big drivers in the book, running loose in the state of Maine, where in theory there are no wild wolves anymore. So it's a real challenge. Anyway, Paul will be here tomorrow night. He's bringing photographs so that we can see the background, the actual background for his book. So I'm going to pick a number, and I'm going to go with 33. Back there. Great. You can claim it for me at the end. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, and I know if anybody's got to go, I signed some books that are up at the counter. There's only a few, but if you can't stay and wait for your book to be signed and you want to sign one, does anybody have a babysitter they have to get back to? I know I just want to make sure, because having had children and spent the money, we've got a lot of folks here, and I want to take all the pictures and sign all the books. But if there's anybody that has a babysitter or anybody who has small children with them, I want to encourage kids to want to read. Not, we stood in line for an hour for that Thor guy with my parents years ago, and now I hate books.
We'll post the line for you.
Okay, you're awesome.
And if you don't want to stay, you can leave your book with us for Brad to sign it, and you can come and pick it up later too. So that'll be fine. Let's give Brad a huge round of applause.
Thank you very much.